Hello everyone, I'm Kenshin. Welcome to Talking History. Today, we're going to talk about the top 10 historical fake news stories. In an age where information channels are so diverse, it's easy to be deceived by false information spread by certain individuals, groups, or even countries with malicious intentions. In a way, it's quite sad that we have to verify even correct information repeatedly. The 10 historical fake news stories we'll discuss today all had a certain degree of impact at the time. Before we start the program, please subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell. It would be even better if you could leave a comment with your thoughts. Without further ado, let's begin. 1. The king's health is poor. As early as the mid-1700s, during the most intense period of the Jacobite rebellions in Britain, inflammatory printers circulated fake news, even reporting that King George II was ill, in an attempt to destabilize those in power. These kinds of fake news were reprinted and republished by more reputable printers, making it difficult for people to distinguish between fact and fiction. Long ago, printing fake news about the monarchy was nothing new in the 1700s either. In 1693, a printer named William Anderton was tried for treason in Old Bailey for publishing 2 pamphlets aimed at inciting the public to rebel against the king and advocating for the restoration of the late King James. The contents include, "False news is harmful to our community, it makes the world less informed, and it erodes trust," Facebook's Adam Mosseri said. All of us, tech companies, media companies, newsrooms, teachers, have a responsibility to do our part in addressing it. The jury found Anderton guilty and he was executed at Tyburn on Friday 16 June 1693. 2. Reports of peace with France drive surge in London stock market. In May 1803, as Britain prepared to terminate the Treaty of Amiens and declare war on France, a letter was hand-delivered to Sir Charles Price, the Lord Mayor of London, at Mansion House. Allegedly authored by Lord Hawkesbury and bearing his personal seal, the letter claimed that the dispute with France had been amicably resolved. The Lord Mayor immediately took this letter to the stock exchange, where share prices surged by 5% on the news of peace. Simultaneously, doubts arose regarding the authenticity of the letter, prompting an investigation. When it was confirmed that the letter was indeed a forgery, the Treasury sent the following press release to the editor of the London Evening Post. "I must inform you, sir, that the news conveyed to His Lordship the Mayor this morning by Lord Hawkesbury, of the amicable conclusion of the negotiations with France, is entirely fictitious and without any basis in fact. Sir, I am your most obedient humble servant, John Sackville." Of course, by then it was too late. Many stocks had changed hands at inflated prices, and the Stock Exchange Committee demanded reports from brokers to identify who may have profited from this fraudulent letter. All attempts to ascertain the identities of the perpetrators of the hoax failed. 3. Life on the Moon. On August 21, 1835, the New York Sun published a series of articles claiming the discovery of life on the Moon. These were erroneously attributed to the renowned astronomer of the time, Sir John Herschel. The article reported that Herschel had made these discoveries using new, hydro-oxygen magnifiers, and went on to describe in believable scientific detail how the discovery was made. Bizarre life forms, inhabitants of the Moon, were described, painting a fantastical picture. Of animals, he classified 9 species of mammalia, and 5 of ovipara. Among the former is a small kind of reindeer, the elk, the moose, the horned bear, and the biped beaver. The last resembles the beaver of the earth in every other respect than in its destitution of a tail, and its invariable habit of walking upon only 2 feet. It carries its young in its arms like a human being, and moves with an easy gliding motion. Great astronomical discoveries lately made. The Sunday, Thursday, August 27, 1835. In August of that year, the newspaper achieved its goal of significantly increasing subscriptions, and in September, it quietly announced that the story was nothing more than a hoax. 4. False reporting angers French railways. In December 1890, Mrs. Macate, the wife of an Algerian pharmacist, claimed that she was attacked and robbed while traveling in a ladies' compartment on a French train. The train departed from Monte Carlo and arrived in Toulon. She told authorities that at some point during the journey, while she was asleep, a thief stole 7,000 francs from her. When she couldn't provide any details about the attacker, some began to doubt her story. However, a few days later, another report of a similar incident made her story more credible. An Italian man attacked a passenger traveling between Lyon and Grenoble with a knife, threatening to kill him unless he handed over money. The attacker then jumped off the train, but when the victim pulled the emergency cord and stopped the train, the attacker was apprehended. It was believed that the same attacker hypnotized Mrs. McKate and robbed her after injecting her with chloroform. However, authorities still had doubts, and further investigation eventually revealed the truth. Mrs. McKate had gone to Monte Carlo to collect a debt, but upon arrival, she was lured to the roulette table and lost all her money. Fearing her husband's anger, Mrs. McKate fabricated a story of being robbed. Eventually, under pressure from the police, she admitted to fabricating the story. She was prosecuted for spreading false information. 5. Jack the Ripper. In 1888, a series of gruesome murders occurred in the Whitechapel district of East London, widely reported at the time. Newspapers provided detailed descriptions of 10 murders, often involving prostitutes. Many sought to profit from this sensational case by spreading false news. 2 drunken young men were arrested and charged with spreading false news. They appeared on Wright's Lane in Kensington with bundles of newspapers, loudly proclaiming, "Jack the Ripper arrested tonight." Newspaper vendors William MacDonald and George Ryle were brought to court but later released. Another news vendor, James Kendrick, was also charged with spreading false news about Jack the Ripper. After slow sales on Sunday, he began to claim a missing woman was found at Chapel Street. Later, he shouted that 4 women were found mutilated at Chapel Street. A customer who purchased his newspaper found no such articles inside and reported him to the police. The newspaper vendor was sentenced to 14 days of hard labor imprisonment. 6. Reports of Mark Twain's death were greatly exaggerated. In June 1897, reports from New York claimed that Mark Twain had died in poverty in London. Mark Twain himself confirmed this to be fake news. On June 2, 1897, the New York Daily published an article titled, "Mark Twain Amused?" authored by Frank Marshall White. When reporters contacted Mark Twain for comment, he told them he didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. He assured them that he and his wife and children were living in a very nice house in Chelsea, with little to no poverty or illness. Twain believed that the story arose because his cousin, James Ross Clemens of St. Louis, had been ill in London a couple of weeks prior, although he had since recovered. "The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Twain said. "The reports of my poverty are even more exaggerated. My friends may know that, judging from the invitations I received to speak at every mail, I should not be living in poverty unless I were actually dead from it. In fact, I am writing a book on contract just finished, or I should accept these invitations." When reporters contacted Mark Twain for comment, "The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Twain said. "The reports of my poverty are even more exaggerated. My friends may know that, judging from the invitations I received to speak at every mail, I should not be living in poverty unless I were actually dead from it. In fact, I am writing a book on contract just finished, or I should accept these invitations." 7. The trap of fake news. In 1903, the Clarksburg Daily Telegram intentionally published a fake news report in an attempt to expose their knowledge of stealing articles from the Clarksburg Daily News. The story was about a shooting incident near the Columbia mines called Meek Swenekafu, and as expected, it appeared in the Daily News the next day. The story recounted the shooting of Slav Swenekafu, who lived near the Columbia coal mines, after a quarrel with an acquaintance over a pet dog, resulting in serious injuries. The least likely name to appear in the story was Swenekafew, which spelled backward is, "We Fake News." The Daily News was thus exposed and forced to admit that for several months, it had been deleting articles from the Daily Telegram. 8. What's the deal with egg prices? In 1916, egg prices in some parts of the United States skyrocketed to an unprecedented 80 cents per dozen, prompting American women to initiate an egg boycott. By late November, women and public officials planned to boycott eggs statewide. Housewives in St. Paul, Minnesota, declared a boycott on refrigerated eggs. Women's clubs in Milwaukee urged members to abstain from purchasing eggs for 6 weeks. Mrs. Ellis Logan began collecting signatures on a petition to Washington, demanding relief from the high cost of American breakfast eggs. Then, on Friday, December 8 of that year, an apparent victory was on the horizon. Headlines in Chicago newspapers read, "Eggs drop 10 cents," and "Cost of living gets a whack," but the next day, it became apparent that it was fake news as grocery stores in the city continued to sell eggs at the same price. These newspapers were allegedly colluding with food retailers. In the years following the 1916 boycott, prices continued to fluctuate with supply and demand, with the cost of eggs steadily rising. 9. World War I fake news. In the spring of 1917, as the First World War raged across Europe, both the Times and the London Daily Mail published reports from anonymous sources, claiming to have visited a German factory named Kadaververwertungsanstalt, which purportedly extracted glycerin from the bodies of the fallen to manufacture soap and artificial butter. Now, long after the war's end, this story is attributed to the British military intelligence, MI7. During the war, MI7 employed 13 military officers and 25 paid writers, including Major Hugh Pollard, who, as a correspondent for the Daily Express, propagated this false story through the newspapers. This horrific piece of fake news was just one of thousands reported on both sides during the war. As an example of German propaganda machinery, in 1914, the French Minister of War reported that the Germans in Alsace-Lorraine were spreading news of French parliamentary votes against the war and the assassination of the Republic's president. 10. World War. The fake news of an alien attack on the United States is a classic example of fake news. On Sunday, October 30, 1938, the Columbia Broadcasting System aired an adaptation of H. G. Wells' 1898 novel, War of the Worlds. During the broadcast, the first two-thirds of the story were presented as a series of breaking news alerts, so realistic that many listeners panicked, believing that an actual alien invasion was taking place. The program began as an interruption of regular programming, announcing that a professor had observed a series of gas explosions on Mars. Subsequently, an announcement stated that a meteorite had landed in New Jersey, causing 15,000 deaths. Another news bulletin contradicted the first one, stating that the meteorite was actually a cylindrical object containing strange creatures from Mars armed with death ray guns. Even before the broadcast ended, doctors, nurses, soldiers, and sailors were reporting for duty, preparing to fight the Martians. Police stations nationwide received thousands of calls. Newspaper reporters, upon hearing of the invasion event, quickly prepared special editions. The producers of the program were taken aback by this reaction, never imagining that anyone would believe the broadcast was real.